back to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be the host of the show. And we're having a follow-up conversation with Rabbi Tattelbaum. And we're going to talk a little bit about his book. And he's going to read some passages from it. But first of all, Rabbi, introduce yourself to the audience again.
It would be my pleasure. I'm Rabbi Harvey M. Tattelbaum. I was born in Boston. I was educated in Boston. I spent not quite half of my life in Boston, but then did all my professional work in New York City. I went to Harvard and to the Hebrew College, and then I went for a year of study to the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and then came back to the United States and was ordained at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion at their New York campus. And I've been a rabbi since 1960, and I was ordained and married in the same week. So I've been a rabbi and a husband for nearly 52 years.
Oh, that's excellent. That is excellent. And we have Rabbi Tattelbaum's book with him, Tales of the Village Rabbi. And he's going to read us some passages from that, and we'll discuss those passages. There you go.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stevenson.
Pleasure to have you on.
It was not a town in the Ukraine or Belarus, nor a shtibel in Poland or Lithuania, nor a shtibela in Russia or Azerbaijan. It has been a bustling, thriving village on the island of Manhattan for over 300 years. Its settlers and occupants were from all the nations of the earth. As the population of the whole island grew, a line of demarcation became pronounced. It had no Yiddish, Hungarian, Russian, or Polish tones to it, simply 14th Street, the northern boundary. The southern boundary was vague and darted in and out of lower Manhattan, a boundary that touched Chinatown, Little Italy, the Lower East Side, the wholesale meat district, all venues of crowded, busy, and unrelenting vitality. Many who settled here felt a certain pride of residence, a pride that often kept them well below 14th Street if possible. A pride that allowed them to respond without any self-effacement to the question, where do you live? And the quickly forthcoming answer was, Greenwich Village. Land values in the village have skyrocketed. Apartments are being rented or bought for prices that surpass the levels of many comparable Upper West Side and Upper East Side dwellings in Manhattan. The years that I served the village community were among the most exciting of my life. Many descendants of the ancient house of Israel settled there. Among the families I knew, some claimed residency back 2 or 3 or more generations, one even back to the time of the Pilgrims of the 17th century. That was the Alden family who married the Cohens. The pride of being part of the inner and immediate life of the village was an integral part of the worldview of my Jews. We found an easy acceptance among the denizens of all that made the village famous throughout the world. The art shows, the gay rights parades, the outrageous adult Halloween processions, the dousing in the fountain of NYU graduates at commencement time, the community battles to keep NYU from expanding its libraries and learning centers, the illogical pattern of crisscrossing charm-filled streets, the crowded stores and eating places, the constant hordes of tourists and passers-through, the beggars and the homeless, the high-cost brownstones, and the opposing new apartment buildings. And St. Vincent's Hospital, which doesn't exist anymore, the Fashion Institute of the new school, and the private schools, the centuries-old, fabulously wealthy churches, the old clubs, and for me, above all, the gathering places of the Jewish community. One in particular on 12th Street, between University Place and Broadway, Congregation B'nai Israel of Greenwich Village. Though not the only synagogue in the area, under its better-known title as the Village Temple, it enabled me to claim the title of the Village Rabbi. That was where I explored, served, and led for an era of my life that I cannot ever put out of my mind. That was where I worked, and here are some of my stories. I recall that the day was sunny, cool, and beautiful. I had sat down at my desk to return phone calls and write some letters and my rabbi's article for our temple publication. I was well into my agenda when the intercom buzzed. The temple secretary informed me that a person was here to see me on an important matter. In my entire career, I never turned anyone away who did not have an appointment, yet who wanted to see me. A gentle knock on the door followed, and in walked the most handsome, tall, the most beautiful man I had ever seen. He was dressed in leather from head to toe, except that his leather cap was in his hand. It was not old, creased leather. It was shiny and a bit stiff. I could hear the leathery brittleness as he moved closer to my desk.
And I can hear that right as you say it. I can hear it. Now, what separates, if anything, what separates a temple from a synagogue? Is there a difference?
No, usually the word temple refers to a Reformed synagogue. Okay. Otherwise, a Reformed temple is a synagogue. A synagogue can be a Reformed temple.
Ah, okay, good. Continue.
He had a luminous smile that lit up my study, and a smile that simply radiated a pearliness rarely seen. He also seemed extraordinarily friendly and sweetly naive. I shook his hand and introduced myself. In his haste to get to his important matter, he overlooked giving me his name. He got right to the point. Rabbi, would you please bless my new motorcycle? I was a bit stunned. I had never blessed any kind of a machine before. I didn't really want to. I couldn't help but react cynically in days gone by to the big churches in town that blessed pets and other animal companions, or bishops who blessed the recreation and fishing boats at the docks of the Hudson and elsewhere. But there was something so guileless, so ingenuous about him, and the way he asked for the blessing. It was not in me simply to say no. I answered that I would bless him, a living human being, but not his motorcycle, an inanimate object. I would wish for the best for him, for many happy days and happy journeys, for strength, good judgment, good fortune, and good health. But I found it difficult to bless his motorcycle. Please, he asked, come downstairs and see it. I was happy to go with him. In spite of the fact that his gleaming, shiny bike, with every possible chrome feature added to it, was in my parking spot in front of the temple entrance. I often came to the temple by subway. I had to admit it. His motorcycle was an object of beauty. One could feel the love, the handwork, the care, the elbow grease, the polish lavished upon it. You see, he said, it lives. Something deep in my own animist soul agreed, but my rationalist outlook won out. I did put my hand upon his shoulder. I blessed him as kindly and lovingly as I could. I even put my other hand on his gleaming, inanimate, significant other, and ended with a moment of silent prayer before the final Amen. When I had finished and informally wished him all kinds of good luck and happy riding, he climbed in the vehicle with a look of pride and satisfaction. He started up a deep, roaring, reverberating sound, probably illegal for the city, and gunned it in neutral a few times. Above the din, he shouted, "Thanks, Rabbi," and roared off on 12th Street into the sunset. I couldn't help but smile. I never saw him again. When I see gleaming bikes along the highways, I am reminded of the wonder of 12th Street. It was a fitting jump start for the rabbi in the village.
Interesting. Very interesting.
This next story, I'll tell you, I lived through again and again, whether I read it to people or not. It's called The Great Wedding Robbery. Otherwise, it was a splendid ceremony.
That's a catchy title, The Great Wedding Robbery.
Right. We had learned our lesson at the village temple, and learned it well. The front door should be kept locked if the entrance was not guarded, and that is what we did. Until the day we had a wedding on a Sunday afternoon, and Sunday was El Domingo. On El Domingo, our custodian Pedro did not work, even though Sunday was a day when he might be most needed. The wedding was scheduled for 1 p.m., and nearly everyone invited was present. Unfortunately, nearly meant not all. I was scheduled to officiate alone. As I was about to lock our infamous front door, the bride especially pleaded with me to leave it open. Some of her dearest relatives and friends had not yet come. I was reluctant to do so, but who can resist the pleadings of a bride on the day of her wedding? Fully confident of the benevolence of the universe, I left the door unlocked. The other request I happily fulfilled was to start the ceremony exactly on time. I was about 1/3 of the way into the ceremony, mesmerizing the attendant congregation with my poetic words of hope and endearment, when my heart started racing madly. 2 men came through the unlocked door. Their hair was long and curly in what we called dreadlocks. On this chilly day, they had no other outer clothing beyond light, colorful, short-sleeved shirts and rather splotched, tight-fitting dark jeans. They entered and saw all the seats on the hooks, and saw all the coats on the hooks on the side wall of the lobby leading to the sanctuary. Since I faced the gathering while all others were facing the ark, I was the only one who saw them. Across the distance of the cozy sanctuary, our jewel of a shul, our eyes met. I saw their faces as they sized up the situation. They knew that I was in the middle of a ceremony. Their glances almost dared me to cry out as they spread out their long arms and gathered in every coat and handbag hanging on those hooks.
Oh.
I could feel my chest thumping inside my shirt and suit jacket. They had essentially dared me, and I could not ruin the ceremony. Yet I could not let them get away with their criminal gall. I called for silent prayer. I asked that we close our eyes and praise with all our heart's intensity for the well-being of the bride and groom. I slithered to the back of the sanctuary. I shall only be a moment, I said, as I exited to the lobby, out the front door, and raced across the street. On the other side of the street was an auxiliary police station where New York's finest came for special training, classes, and seminars. I had often eyed the building with envy, as I thought it would make a great Hebrew school. But no such thoughts were in my mind at that moment. I opened the front door, still wearing my talit and yarmulke. There was a guard at the door. I explained as fast as I could. I'm the rabbi from the temple across the street. I'm in the middle of a wedding ceremony. 2 men came in and stole all the coats and handbags. Help us, do something. I felt certain that he thought I was a crazy man. I felt sure that the entire wedding party must have thought I had gone mad.
And your voice must have been in a very high pitch at that point.
I don't know how I even spoke. What kind of a rabbi leaves the synagogue in the middle of a wedding ceremony? When I returned and was walking down the aisle, I announced with a cute tremolo in my voice, "Friends, all the coats and bags have been stolen. I have given word to the police. What we must do now is the most important thing we can do. Finish the ceremony. This is what we must do." As I was talking, there were muffled shrieks, sighs of agony, whispers, and yelps. But I took my place before the ark, facing the bride and groom. 120 over 80 must long ago have turned into 300 over 200 for all of us.
I'm sure the blood pressure was up for everybody, yeah.
With utmost restraint, I continued and finished the ceremony. In spite of it all, everyone seemed attentive. There was tremendous release and relief when the groom broke the glass and kissed the bride. As the two folded into one before me, my view of the street beyond the lobby was unhindered. Something was going on outside the door. I could not be sure, and proceeded back up the aisle to see what was happening. Everyone in the wedding party followed. Although East 12th Street is a one-way street, police cars were coming from both directions. Inside one of the cars were the 2 thieves and all the coats and handbags. Uniformed officers began distributing the belongings. There was laughter, relief, a sense of triumph, victory. I felt compelled to thrust my head into the car where the 2 men sat and to proclaim aloud, "How can you rob a synagogue in the middle of a wedding? How dare you do such a thing?" I paused. They both spoke, but it was such a mumbo-jumbo, I couldn't grasp a word of what they said. One of the policemen said that he saw the two men walking very quickly along Union Square about 2 blocks from the temple. Their arms were filled with coats and bags. He said he knew immediately that the picture was wrong and they were up to no good. And at that moment, the radio call came in about a robbery in a synagogue on 12th Street during a ceremony. Other cars were alerted and converged in front of the front door of the temple. I later learned that the people for whom we had left the door open never did show up.
Oh.
But once the goods were returned, the wedding party went on its merry way.
Oh.
Much later on, perhaps a year or more, my wife and I were spaziering, that's wandering around the village.
Spaziering?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
And browsing on a rare day off. There was a store with some amazing material, huge slabs of gigantic South American jungle trees.
It sounds like spaziering sounds like sightseeing.
Yeah, just walking around enjoying yourself, with no special purpose in mind. And we saw this store with huge jungle trees polished and lacquered to shining perfection. The large store was filled with these creations, and they were quite striking. Some were fashioned into large tables, end tables, coffee tables, clocks, whatever the creative imagination and talented hand could fashion. Behold, the proprietor of the store was a handsome, tall, mustachioed man. I knew him. Recognition came quickly. He was the groom on the day of the great wedding robbery. We acknowledged each other. We laughed and embraced. What a ceremony. Something we would never forget. How is your bride? How are you doing? The answer came forth in short order. We were divorced a short time ago. The divorce had nothing to do with a tumultuous wedding ceremony. The ceremony was one we would always remember.
In spite of a bit of a sad ending, is certainly a very joyous beginning, an odd kind of way, but a very joyous beginning.
I just wonder if some of the tension of that day might have had a lingering influence.
Yeah,
on
it's a little bit of an odd, quirky kind of ceremony because of that. But you know,
I'll never forget. Those
everyone
two
seemed
guys.
to flow with it pretty well. It sounds like.
I'll never forget those two guys coming in,
just grabbing coats.
everything, every last thing. Their outreach was amazing.
Big arms, the long arm of not the long arm of the law, but the long arm of the anti-law, so to speak,
of the criminal. I will never forget the angst of my first real human predicament. Just before I came to the village temple, its previous president was put in jail. It was a white-collar crime, and the man had a wife and 3 young children. The judge who sentenced him was known as a hanging judge and took no notice of his or his lawyer's plea for mercy. His defense lawyer was also a member of the temple's board of trustees and chairperson of the search committee that had selected me as the rabbi. Factions of the congregation were up in arms. The former president served his full prison term. He was scheduled for release just before the high holy days. It was the tradition of the temple to honor its past presidents by having him hold the Torah during the emotional singing of the Kol Nidre on the evening of Yom Kippur. Those holding the Torah were a symbolic, righteous tribunal of Yom Kippur judgment. Dozens of calls came to me at the office and every night at home exclaiming that such an honor should not be given to a convicted criminal just out of jail.
And of course Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement.
That's right. That's right. Trusting in the goodness and reasonableness of human nature, I felt that a good and sincere heart-to-heart talk with that past president ex-con would resolve the problem. My hope was that after a talk with me, he would graciously withdraw and not be the source of any harmful dissension in the temple. I think I learned more about the vagaries of perverse human nature and temple politics in that half hour over coffee than in 3 years as an assistant rabbi. He would have none of my request. He had served his time, justice had been done, and he would steadfastly, courageously assert his right and privilege, as was his entitlement in keeping with the long-standing tradition of the temple. He would not be denied the honor of holding a Torah during Kol Nidre. In addition to his in-your-face refusal, he contacted at least a dozen of the trustees of the board and members at large to call me and berate me for my sycophantic, that was his term, not mine.
Sycophantic? Whoa!
Injustice. By the time I received the 16th late-night call for and against, I was an emotional wreck. I made my decision. I knew what I felt had to be done. I knew what I had to do. Rosh Hashanah went well. I felt that I had put my special personal mark upon the life of the congregation. After my strong insistence, the congregation abolished the selling of tickets for the high holidays, and like most Reform congregations, required membership. It worked. Those who were in my corner could claim with me that the membership of the temple had nearly doubled in size within the framework of only a bit more than 1 month. Rosh Hashanah, with all its electrifying drama, came and went. Kol Nidre and Yom Kippur were dead ahead. We got to the Kol Nidre service. I announced that we would follow the, quotes, tradition of nearly utter darkness in the sanctuary so that each person could be truly alone with one's deepest inner thoughts and feelings and memories. I had done this with the United States Marines while serving as a Navy chaplain at Paris Island because I wanted to avoid the glaring GI fluorescent lights. After the lights were extinguished, I called the Torah holders forth without calling names. No one could really see them. If it was an honor, which it was veiled in a lovely, heavy, pervading darkness. The congregation could barely see the pulpit. The cantor could hardly see his musical notes. Those on the pulpit could barely see the congregation. The Torahs were lifted and held. The Kol Nidre was beautifully chanted. I think I never heard it sung with such meaning and sweetness.
The darkness, I'm sure, added to the quality of that, the solemnity of the occasion,
as well as the supposed
as well as keeping everybody from seeing everybody else and being distracted by this obviously very distracting circumstance.
In order to extend the exalted feeling, I had the quiet darkness linger till after the scrolls were replaced in the ark and the holders had been seated. The darkness covered the controversy. A feeling of relief and satisfaction permeated the sanctuary, our, quotes, jewel of a shul. A lot of people gave me wordless thumbs up after the service was over.
That's in such a smart, efficient way to diffuse a very difficult situation. Everybody walked away a winner. Everybody got what they wanted.
But had I not done that years before with the Marines, I don't know if it would have occurred to me.
That's lessons learned in life.
I don't know if that ex-president, ex-con, resented the whole thing. I don't think he did, because I didn't get a word. And he was not a retiring sort of person. Uncommon weddings I have known. Wherever one serves as a rabbi in Manhattan, be it uptown or downtown, one is likely to officiate at a wedding or a certain world-famous hotel. Both before and after its renovation, it epitomizes elegance. From the bronze-gated elevators to the marble floors, the gilded walls, the flowing drapes, the haute cuisine service and fare, and the old-world ambiance. I don't want to say the name of the hotel.
Okay, I shan't ask you then.
It was all there at a late Saturday night wedding. Tuxes, tails, and gowns, a full white bridal gown, a score of men and women as ushers, bridesmaids, a classical quartet for professional musical background, and changing lighting for the various stages of the ceremony. All went well until suddenly a huge brown water bug / cockroach jumped on the lower part of the front of the bride's white gown. No one in the assemblage saw it, except the bride, the groom, the best man, the maid of honor, the 2 sets of parents, and the rabbi and the cantor. It proceeded to climb up the gown higher and higher. Except for the panic of the bride and her low moaning, there was utter silence. Attention to the words of my ceremony was rapt. I noticed the cantors chanting weakening a bit. Decisive action was called for. I stopped speaking. The creature was almost waist high. I put my rabbi's manual in my left hand. My right hand was now free. I struck. I swiped my hand down the front of the gown. The monster fell to the floor. I struck again with my right foot as quickly and as hard as I could. Those of us at the chuppah, that's the wedding coverage, heard the crunch, while those who were in the congregation and not paying close attention heard the loud stamp of a foot. Thinking it was the groom breaking the glass at the end of the ceremony, they applauded and loudly proclaimed, Mazel Tov, good luck.
And a natural inclination to hear a sound, and that's the sound you're going to hear, and they reacted accordingly.
Of a Jewish wedding. The bride was enormously relieved, the groom grateful. Sighs of satisfaction came from those all around me. Many in the audience were confused as the cantor and I calmly continued the ceremony until it was over, to be climaxed yet again by the groom's breaking of the glass. As I left the pulpit, I couldn't help but notice one big, dead, upside-down roach on the floor. It, too, had paid the price for an elegant wedding. Later, during cocktails, I overheard a comment. I guess that's the way it is now with modern ceremonies, modern reform ceremonies. Even the rabbi breaks a glass.
And with that, we're going to have to break away from the show because we've run out of time. But we shall have you back on future occasions to hear more of the book, to talk about many, many more subjects that are dear to the hearts of human beings everywhere.
It would be my pleasure, David.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Tattelbaum. Been a pleasure having you on. Good night. This is Progressive Soup. David Stevenson, Rabbi Tattelbaum, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks. Good night. Nailed it.
Good. Okay.
Excellent.